I do want to talk about what happened to you, and I do consider it something that happened to you as well as Posey Parker, although you would be seen as the assailant. But I think, you know, when you think about that now, do you think you would do it again? If you could have that, if you could have that moment again, would you do the same thing? We've been trying to have this conversation for a while, and because obviously you're all the way over on the other side of the world, that makes it quite difficult, because when I'm getting up, you're going to bed usually. And that's made it quite, as well as it being like one of the busiest weeks for you, like, you know, with Passover.
Pesach. Yeah, so, it is busy.
Well, it's a similar thing with me. I've got a very strange family. I've got my mum's. I've got part Catholic, part Jewish, and my next door neighbour's a Muslim. So it's all a bit of very social occasion the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm glad I've finally managed to be able to talk to you, because there's been a lot. Because what happened over the last, I say, 3 years is you had to basically go into hiding, didn't you?
Well, it was mostly on the early months, because I was actually having a type of like breakdown, you know, like a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
Because you know, some people are born with acute pattern recognition, and we tend to respond very primitively, and I would say impulsively, to these ongoing efforts of fascism to always figure out how to break humanity in halves and halves and halves, and how to weaponize smaller communities and proceed with this typical fascist rhetoric, which is it's just part of life. It's part of humanity, and always comes to these atomic levels of needs of trying to classify everything.
Well, I'm just scrolling through your Instagram, and the reason I wanted to, because I'm just like showing things on screen as we talk, but you've kind of had to sort of recenter yourself, I think, because what I noticed happening is when it blew up in the media and you suddenly became like the centre of all this negative media attention, they wanted a win so badly. They wanted to create that. they wanted to cover up the whole reason you did what you did. They wanted to cover up the fact that Kellie Jay Keen had brought out the Nazis, basically, and that's basically what happened. And they wanted to cover that up by focusing on you, and I think that's what we saw. You know, the Free Speech Union they're very selective about the free speech they want to promote, aren't they? So
yeah, it's okay. They have the money, and as long as you have the money, you can platform whoever you want to platform, right?
Yeah,
it's been always like that. It's been even since French Revolution times, during the Russian Revolution too. There were specific voices that were given the chance to speak, especially those that were studied outside, like Mr. Lenin. He went to study in Switzerland, right? He was a privileged person, despite of eating broken plates and stuff like that. But it's this kind of type of like exilic people that have the ability to see outside, beyond, and inside, and also connect their communities. And so, yeah, I realized that kind of being from the point of view of Putin's perspective, because I'm Russian. Okay.
Well, yeah, this is what I wanted to talk about, because a lot of people, like when I talk to people about you, they only know that one thing about you, you know, that one news story, that like that 5 seconds of your life. And I think it's important people know, and this is what I try and communicate to people, is that you were kind of stateless. You arrived in New Zealand with no identity.
That was a second statelessness, because my mom left the Soviet Union in the 70s because she married a Colombian guy.
Colombian.
In very strong, in strong patriarchal societies, even if she's a pediatrician, strong patriarchal societies mean that giving up a citizenship by marrying someone else means that she stops being care for the state she's supposed to represent, right? Which was back in the day the Soviet Union. So she ended up in Colombia, essentially stateless, because when the Soviet Union split in 15 countries, my mom was given no state, and that's when I was born. So I was born with no state on their own, and also because of the anxieties it causes in my family, we have this medical condition that I was born with, which is it's not a big deal for me, but it is a big deal for breeders that are obsessed on what you do with your
That's
with
true.
your parts and whether you can have or not babies. So
I think
that's in a nutshell.
I think for you, like, the subject of your body was something that was present from an early age. Like for a lot of transgender people, they come out and then talk about their body and wanting to change their body or whatever. But you didn't necessarily have that choice. You were put in a position where this was you had to, because I had a similar thing when I was younger. My body didn't develop. Like, my mum noticed, not to put it too blunt, my balls didn't drop. So I remember I remember my mum talking about my body in a weird way, and it's strange that when I hear people talking about bodies now, I've always had that experience. Do you know what I mean? And I think you share.
I think bodies have like a spectrum, right? And even if arguing like how do you define what is and isn't, and whether the breeding poles, which is essentially the bimodals of male and female, and however you want to define gender around that, because the English language is very economical and lazy in understanding. Yeah, like woman is almost like womb, even the word, which I find it like, the word woman comes from womb. Like it's so reductive, right? Like,
well,
and I think that's what they want.
That is,
what's how they want.
That's true. The etymology is interesting, but it's like I always say that, when people make these arguments, say, you can't have a woman with a penis, and it's like it's the language that is failing, not the experience of the person. Because
persistent Mullerian Duck syndrome is a case where such thing could happen, right? And it's not having that example present in your life means that you just deny that things can happen, and there is always an exception to the rule. But in fascism, there is always no exceptions, because the rule is not to have exceptions for anything, but to everything to be black and white, no nuance, and that's it. It's the economy, the moral economy, that there is not even morality in their economy. It's just like whatever, annihilate difference, which was one of the words Posy Parker was screaming from Australia before she came here. She was like, I will annihilate all women that stand in front of my way, right? So her very own words.
Well, the thing with, like you say, it's about control, isn't it? It's about controlling the language. So there has to be, the language is decided by whoever wants to control it. So this is why, when we talk about medical settings, because we see these stories in the paper now and again, they're talking about chest feeding, or they're talking about women, they're not mentioning women, they're saying that people that can get pregnant, and it's because they don't need to say woman when they need to include people. You can change the language so it includes all, but they don't like that because there's this sense that something is being taken away from them. It's like babies being taken the pacifier away, because suddenly the language isn't for them.
Because English is a very we are speaking right now in English, right?
Yeah.
I speak actually in a little bit in different to people like Posy Parker and ignorant women that follow her. I actually speak quite many languages, including Russian and Portuguese, Spanish, English, even Tereo and Chinese. And something that I find fascinating, different to English, is the richness and the etymological complexity of the word for women, right? In English, women is almost like an organ of the body, right?
Yeah.
Even when you hear about, like, when you are learning the story of Adam Harishon, which is Adam the First, which was created as this kind of like not like gender ambiguous being before being split into two things, which was men and then the which the identity of a woman was built from, right? And even the word in Hebrew, which is ish and isha, and how isha, the letter hey, is essentially the womb, the part that emanates from ish, which is yod means the phallus, and esh or shin, which means fire, the fire of the phallus, and isha, which is hey, which is the ability of fecundity. Yeah? All of those things, right?
Yeah,
all of that.
But I think for a lot of the audience of the gender critical movement, it's a kind of bioessentialist, reductive thing of
because they don't like to study. Even if they study, like Helen Joyce, she is the type of person that 2 + 2 will never equal 5, or 1 + 1 equals 3, because
to understand, it's about absolutes and certainty, and when I have been in conversation with those people, it's always my intention to show them as the aggressor, and because I obviously Helen Joyce famously said that transgender is a problem to a sane world. I am that problem to a sane world, because if you try to find a sane world, you're going to have to eliminate a lot of people, because who is deciding who is sane, for one thing, and people have a right to their own conditions. They have a right. This is the thing with when people talk about, I hear this all the time, right? Because people will say, oh, Freda, you're mentally ill, go and get some psychiatric help. I did have psychiatric help, and it really fucking helped me, thank you very much. And I would recommend people talk to a therapist or somebody that is able to, help them organize.
These people, they don't even believe in mental health. This is the other part of this problem that the women like this have, that they don't even believe in mental health.
Wow.
Right? They project all the awful things that men have done to them into whatever thing that they can sort of project all their anxieties they have about men. People with XY chromosomes. That's it,
Yeah,
whatever.
I did want to say something about that, because what I find is it's easier to imagine a demon. It's easy to imagine this phantom trans woman that's trying to take over something, go into your toilets. But the real problem for a lot of those women, and this is why I do have sympathy for this kind of, that they want a voice, they want to speak, and if somebody's going to give them a microphone, they need that. But because they can't challenge the actual abuse which lives under their own roofs. The misogyny and the patriarchy is on their doorstep, and it's hard to challenge that. It's hard to challenge your brothers, your husbands, your sons, and whoever it is, because
they have deep intelligence. They have raised men and children and into adults, and they know how men behave. They know that there are people that do awful things when they have power, such as Donald Trump. They know who's Caligula, they know who's Caesar, they know who's Nero, they know all these characters mentioned even in the Bibles.
I think it's important, though. It's important to remember that when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking individually about certain men or certain women, because this is a force that affects all of our lives. Like, when people talk about toxic masculinity, and they'll talk about the manosphere, men are just as much a victim of that as anybody else, because they feel like they have to position themselves and posture themselves in the world. And I think that is damaging to them, because obviously that expectation of masculine and femininity
and disposability, because men are disposable, right? I grew up on understanding both in the Colombian culture and also in the Soviet Russian culture I grew up, that males are disposable and they die, and they wait for them to show use like purpose and usefulness is by dying for what? For a nation or for a concept that makes sense to them, a religion, an attribute, or dying for a woman, or dying for the nation of that woman they love, or
the self-sacrifice,
whatever.
The self-sacrifice.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is it's mythic, you know. It's and I think that's how like the myth of nations is built upon this sort of like naive understanding of this type of like, like I will say, values that we attribute to masculinity, which is something disposable, is something that it's necessary, but at the same time is complicated because the attribute we have for men in this category, often those men that see themselves as heroes and as Supermans and Spider-Mans or Batmans or whatever things they see themselves, they ended up being as broken as very broken in the inability to like relate to others. They isolate themselves. They never trust women. They see women as inherently evil, and they become unnatural predators of women while they see themselves as heroes. They're trying to save women from themselves because not even they are actually contributing in a way that is affirming.
I think
Because
this is I mean, obviously that is something you've had experience of, but you see, I sometimes think that we're trying to grapple with things that individually is far too much for us to take, and when we start thinking about these things, we take on a lot of baggage. You know what I mean? Because it's like when I'm specifically thinking about the idea of being trans woman, being whatever that means. But trans people don't invent that language. We don't dictate the language. We navigate it. And because of academia, because of living through quite a liberal time in the West, which, you know, I think is being challenged now, I think the academics had that power for a long time about who owned that language. So obviously you get words like transgender and trans woman come into the popular lexicon, but they're not the popular lexicon for a lot of people. So when they go out into workplaces and they go on the internet, and this might be the first time they've encountered those normalities, because they are normal for the people that use them, they're not normal for them. So because I've noticed this, like with do you know when people go on social media and they're suddenly bombarded with a lot of stuff about drag queens and drag queen story hour and trans women and trans women in sports, trans women, and it's suddenly the people that would not have thought about those things at all are being encouraged to have opinions on them, whereas ordinarily they would have never have that would have never crossed their path. But because the internet, the internet wants to keep them.
Typical divide and rule, you know, and this is a very British thing, by the way. This divide and rule thing, it's inherited, of course, by Roman leaders. We told, you know, Roman leaders that the best way to keep populace controlled is pane circenses, but at the same time, divide and rule.
Well,
sometimes you do it by giving half and halves to groups of people that hate each other for various reasons you don't even need to know about. I will say in this part, tell me, my dear.
I was just saying, because the rise of Donald Trump, because when I look at it, it isn't really about politics. It's not about ideologies in the sense that somebody believes. It's about winning. And there was a group of people who felt they were not winning, and it felt like they didn't have the media and they didn't have the power. But and there's probably an element of truth to that, because we know that in America and in Britain and stuff, the left, what they would call the left, and demonise as wokery, did have an upper hand in the media, and they would promote, because it is good to be inclusive, it's good to be diverse, it's good to have lots of different cultures on TV so people can learn from them. But the people that are always inherently challenging of that or felt threatened by that were still there. and they were given a voice all at once. Like, yes, you know, you can be racist, you can be homophobic, you can be sexist, because that's free speech now, and you shouldn't be told what, because they have this idea that, oh, they're being told what to think and being told what to say. It says, no, we were just trying to educate you. We were just trying to make you realise that that is a bad path to go down, because history tells us it is. So you've got these people that are really angry going, I want my free speech, I should be able to use the N-word, I should be able to use misogynistic language because that's my right. But yeah, you can have that right, but it comes with responsibility, and a lot of them don't want that responsibility, and that's where people like the Free Speech Union come in, because they can say, oh, you know, all those times you felt not listened to. Yeah.
So in their perfect world, perfect world, what they want is a white woman like Posey Parker going out in the streets calling the N-word anything she sees, or any awful like racist thing that you can imagine. And she wants like a Bonnie and Clyde type of, you know, and he will be a Clyde, which is a guy who's just shooting everything that he dislikes. Yeah. That is the type of mentality of these people, right? It's very like, you know, like we do as we please. We are the rulers of the world, and that's it. And shut up. This is kind of this type of mentality. You know, this type of mentality.
I would go back. Yeah, go on. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Yeah, no, it's all right. No, just because this type of mentality, I have found it in multiple countries. I have existed in as both as a man, as a woman, as nothing, as everything, as who gives a fuck. Yeah. But one thing that I have realized is that Anglo-Saxon culture has been very great at creating the ambiguity necessary for this gender word to erupt in this particular context. Because you will be surprised, and even though Putin's homophobia is well known internationally, and Russian fascism is as bad as it can be, Russians are not obsessed in trying to define what is a woman.
No.
You know, the people that are obsessed with defining that word are the English people. But I was wondering, why is that the case?
There is. I mean, I'm just looking at a magazine that I get called Byline Times, and that's what you would call traditionally a left-wing magazine. And what we find is that the way just to follow on from that a little bit, but you know, this idea of Russian meddling in the media, and I think that's a bit of a misnomer. I think that has been allowed to happen. It's not like the Russians have got hold of our media and sent in spies and sent in.
When was the last time you like access like Russian media, right? And I'm not saying that you should or anyone has to, but there is a narrative missing also that people have to remember. It's also relevant today, because what is going on with the Middle East and all of that part of the narrative is a little bit more rational than the one that Donald Trump is carrying right now. You know what I mean?
Well, it's useful to say. It's useful to say it's the Russians, because they can always be the eternal bogeyman, can't they, to the West? But I mean, if you look at, I mean, not to get too into Putin and what's going on in the Middle East, but if you think about it, like Putin is an amazing chess player. If you know what I mean, he could not have planned this any better for his outcomes. Something
I did not talk about, because I am very private with various aspects of my life, but I grew up with bears. I grew up with Russian bears.
Oh, wow.
We have, we Russians, especially when we are very close to like important figures of like World War II or things like that, we are given this opportunity to like live with, raise bears and looked after bears, right? So in our family we have 3 bears, and I grew up with one of them who's right now in Siberia, right? And Putin also had that same opportunity. That's why Putin had, you know, that one thing that when you grow up with an animal that is so unpredictable and can literally rip you apart, you learn to control aspects of that impulsive behavior that it's human. It's nothing to do with gender. It's just a human part of you. I realized that in the Western world, we deny our ability to understand that we are also animals, right? And is that ignorance of knowing that we are animals too, that is the reason why we get dominated with Hollywood narratives or heroes narratives that actually mean nothing. Because if you navigate the psychology of Supermans or all of these stories, you realize that there is emptiness on the concept itself of like a hero that saves humanity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, like the old stories. I mean, Hollywood, and to get a bit more. I mean, I'm going to go a bit deep on that. I mean, those old narratives seem to be failing. You know, like the hero's journey. You know, the idea that the actual breaking down of trust of power. You know, like I think that happened. I think a lot of people got radicalized during COVID because they saw that governments actually don't know what they're doing. You know, the people that we trust, you know, in established medical settings, established political settings, they don't actually know what they're doing. And I think
Yeah, I mean, pandemics are not common in the Western world. In the Soviet Union, there were many various pandemics precisely because of the poverty that was more pronounced in various parts of like Ukraine, Russia. Like, look, when COVID happened in Russia, there were conspiracies about COVID and all of that. It was not even allowed. Like Putin said, stop with this nonsense. We will have our vaccine even if it doesn't get approved by World Health Organization. Who gives a F? Whatever. And the people who kept trapped in these narratives of conspiracies were all the same people that always trying to find something darker than the shadow of themselves.
Yeah.
And one thing I realized as a pharmacist that I am is that we are not prepared for pandemics, first. Second, a human should be allowed to have bodily autonomy, and that bodily autonomy should always be respected. And many people felt violated with, when they were forcing vaccinations or face masking and all of that. And to be honest with you, one thing I realized is there is nothing worse you can do to a human that is forcing him, her, or them to do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the one lesson, yeah.
I think when people were in on the computers and they were going on the internet more, I think people formed communities online, and some of them were negative ones, obviously. And I think, have you heard of Mumsnet? Mumsnet is like a sort of a women's sort of forum, and I think TERFs really infiltrated that, and that's when I don't know, I can't, I've not studied it for sure, but it just seems like that's when a lot of this, you know, the dog whistles and the hashtags of what we call turfery or gender critical seem to come about, but it seemed to be pushed more. It just seemed to turn it. It just seemed to push it over the edge, and you know, like what. So, like when you must have been an observer of what was happening with the gender critical movement. I don't know how much you knew about it before what happened in Albert Park.
Because I had the opportunity to enjoy like a world where there was no internet, and when gender issues were discussed with doctors coming to visit me at home in Colombia. It's like literally when I was born, they have to bring like a set of doctors from all over the USSR to figure out what's going on with me. It was actually quite fun.
Wow.
But one thing that I realized that is that there was not even language for any of the things that we were discussing. You know, like we were just learning about chromosomes, because actually chromosomes and the understanding of the process of the biological processes and how sex is determined by the SRY gene and all of these like mechanics of it, like the biochemistry also of the hormonal paths, and how, like, for instance, aromatase enzymes work, or conditions such as partial androgen insensitivities, which by itself is a very It's a cluster, it's a syndrome. So meaning syndrome, it's composed by various different aspects that are not aligning always the same in every individual. And various other conditions that have a different arrangement, and regardless of what is the definitive element of sex characteristics that you claim to be the one that defines everything, right? Because in the third world, they want always to reduce everything to the smallest possible reductive part of sex. It's the Y chromosome, right?
Well,
no, it is the ability to carry children, or is the relatedness of the act of belonging to 50% of a group. Well, you know what I mean?
I can sort of differentiate like these arguments, because you'll notice that people are not having the argument because they want to understand the science. They're having the argument because they weaponize the science to reduce your kind of sense of who you are. So if somebody can say, oh well, you're not trans or you're not female because biology says so, that will be a useful way to do it. But actually what we find, when obviously science doesn't work that way, when we look down microscopes, we don't get answers, we get more questions. It's like when people look out into space through telescopes, they don't get answers, do they? They might make some discoveries, they'll work something out, but there's no ultimate answer to like what we are fundamentally as human beings. I think that's why it cuts to the very core of who we are. And there is a spiritual dimension always to that, because I think that's what gender is. If gender is anything, it's that unquantifiable part of ourselves that isn't necessarily rooted in the flesh, and it's not rooted in the genome. It's something that we don't know, and it's okay to say we don't know. I think there are some trans people, some who do want to go down this biological path of finding a gene that says we're trans or whatever. But I just don't think that's ever going to happen. I just don't think that exists. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's just my personal thing. I think, like, when, you know what happened in the UK with the Supreme Court ruling, and they love the Supreme Court rulings because it's like there's some kind of authority in the sky that has told them what men and women are. But actually, no, they don't. It's like, have you ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they build a supercomputer? They build a supercomputer. I don't
even care. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they build this supercomputer to try and find out what the answer to life, the universe, and everything is, and the answer is 42 because they don't understand the question. And when they ask what is a woman or what is a man, they don't understand the question. They think there is an answer, and for some people there will be an answer, and it'll be very simple, and that will do. But for somebody like you or me, the question still remains.
Yeah, it's not controversial in this country where I live. It's absolutely uncontroversial. Like, many people know me. Many people know, people like you. Yes, you could be a man, a woman, whatever. You just use whatever toilet you want, you know. And you know, and socially, if you just socially or perceive, accepted, behave, dress, whatever in a specific way, you just go as a place. To be honest with you, it's uncontroversial in this country. Other things are more controversial, and I think Pussy Parker just aimed wrong by coming here. She was thinking that she was the Queen of England, and as a Queen of England, she can just come here and tell the subjects to subdue and to subjugate. You know,
she's a strange character because you call her Posy Parker, Kellie Jay Keen. She goes by many names, and she's become a kind of cartoon figure of that movement. I mean, she always has the same slogans, and she has her own merch and all this, and it's kind of like a travelling circus. And everywhere they go, I mean, what happened in Albert Park in New Zealand was not unique. Things have happened wherever she goes, right? And wherever she goes, she's not
that was nothing really. In comparison with what is happening, and after that, this is absolutely nothing. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. If you think about that,
it's necessary for them to catastrophize it and to make a story out of it, because I mean the people around Kellie Posey are the people like the Free Speech Union who basically pay for her to go over
They are
there.
the drama queens. They are
Yeah,
the drama queens.
they need they enjoy platforming people who are going to generate that kind of media attention. It's a media game, isn't it? It's like a point scoring game, which I mean in this country the media is pretty much right wing, and it's the Daily Mail, and it's terrible, and everybody knows it's terrible. But for some reason,
I think it's been always like that, right? Like even during previous wars and stuff like that, the BBC has always taken a very hard right like approach to things, right? So I think it's just unsurprising.
Yeah, I got this book by one of the people that works for Sex Matters. Sex Matters is like one of the more they have a sort of veneer of respectability because they can call themselves a charity. But Fiona McKenna wrote the book Turf Island, and it's really funny because the bits with Posey Parker, they try to portray her as if she's on some kind of hero's journey where she's going around the world spreading the truth, and they portray what happened as a kind of like
eye-opening.
A flashpoint.
That was so eye-opening. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. Finally, I got enlightened. Like, Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for opening my eyes.
Yeah. Well, what strikes me about it is when they publish these things, it's like they've published their own kind of hero's journey or struggle. There's another book called Women Who Won't Wished, and it's exactly the same kind of thing. It's like a bunch of stories about how I became a fighter for women's rights. It's like, you're not doing anything for women's rights. What women are going to benefit from this? None. And it's like, it's just a kind of, I can understand, like, because some of them feel like they're in a club, it's kind of illicit, and they've got this camaraderie, and I think that,
they just miss romance. They just miss a guy who goes and kills and brings, like, I don't know, game to feed their women, and then has very wild sex with them. And how you see how they fantasize about this wild love, which is usually a guy that goes around the world and has long hair and it's definitely not their partners or husbands.
I think
whatever.
so.
It's someone else.
I'm not sure how that relates to Posey Parker, but the thing about it is.
No, but Posey Parker knows this craving, this kind of romantic craving, right? Because she's not silly. She knows very well that English literature, Shakespeare, and all of how that narrative has influenced the Western world, but predominantly English-speaking world. Yeah. It is something that she understands very deeply. And for that type of narrativizing, you need to have very clear understanding of what the British world and the English world understand as being a man and what is, or the British world or the English world understand as being a woman. That's why she was born to be the walking definition of adult human female. And that's what she is. Yeah. And that's what she will be. And that's what she is meant to, that's her entire life,
Yeah.
To define that. Yeah.
I mean, she recently did an event with the Free Speech Union because they knew it was 3 years since the famous soup incident. So I bought tickets for that because I wanted to go with my friend. And honestly,
it was tomato juice, by the way.
Yeah, I always say cold soup because it sounds better. But and anyway, I wanted to go, and they banned me from going because obviously they know who I am and they thought I was going to cause trouble. But the thing is, there was a bit of trouble, but it was from a trans woman who'd been trying to be their friend. Do you know what I mean? She was trying to be one of those trans women that says, I'm gender critical. I know I'm not a woman. I'm a man, but I should be allowed to express, which is fine, But they totally shouted her. They shouted her out the building, and the only reason they, I was going to do a reaction video of it, but it's just so boring because she doesn't actually say anything inspiring. There's no substance to anything she says. The only function of Kellie Jay Keen seems to be able to subvert feminism as misogyny, because she will go into people's towns, she will go into people's cities and set up this...
No, she's a provocateur. She's a professional provocateur.
Yeah,
and you just have to align her pockets properly, and she will hate whatever you wanted her to hate. If I decide that I don't like Persian cats, even though I have one, and I pay this person Posy Parker to hate Persian cats, she will just dedicate her entire life to hate Persian cats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how simple she is. That's how it's grifting, and
it's useful to people who because real feminists, they don't get on the radio, they don't often get on TV, there are people in the Free Speech Union that actively attack women who stand up for freedom of speech, in the sense that they want to talk about abortion rights, they want to talk about contraception, they want to talk about, even women in sports that do work in grassroots sports for girls will never get on TV to talk about those issues, because the aim of the gender critical seems to be to talk over women that want to bring those issues to the media. So what I always discourage activists from engaging with people like Kellie Jay Keen, really, because what they do it because they want the agitation. And whenever I go onto TV, whenever I've been in the radio, I'm always conscious of the fact that while I'm doing this, there are women that are not being talked about. They're only talking about the issue because the word trans is part of the news story, whether that be trans women in prisons, trans women in sports, trans women in single-sex spaces. There are issues that women want to talk about relating to those.
Yeah, and those issues have to be talked about, but also the problem that this rhetoric of people like these women, like Posy Parker, and those like around her, like J.K. Rowling, people like her.
Yeah.
They want to make the red herrings everywhere, right? Like in this country, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there has not been an incident in which a trans person has assaulted anyone in a toilet, really. For the 200 years that this country, or whatever you call it, has existed, it's not been an issue here.
But the thing is, that's true. But when there is an incident, that becomes front page news. When there is I've always said this about, because I've been following the moon mission, the mission, the Artemis mission, and there's a woman on that mission, and she to me, she is should be a hero to girls. She should be talked about, and she should be talked about in that sense of it's not like we focus all our attention on one woman. It's the idea that there is something universal now about that story. But you won't see that from TERFs. You don't see that from any of the gender critical people.
Valentina Tereshkova.
Yeah.
Valentina Tereshkova was the first female in space, and I'm speaking as a person that is related to Gagarin, because my family.
Yeah, I was looking on your Instagram.
Believe it or not, yeah, it's we are connected to Gagarin. Fantastic. In various ways. Okay.
Well, at Manchester Airport, there's a plaque there to Gagarin because he landed there.
I didn't know that, by the way. Yeah, and I didn't know that. Yeah, so when in the Vostok 1, 1961. Yuri Gagarin was in the Vostok 1 in Kazakhstan. Yeah, that very well known. And then Valentina Tereshkova, she was the first adult human female in space.
Exactly.
And that has to be like celebrated. That's a win for women and for whatever females or whatever, like the obvious thing that Posy Parker wants us. Like, I'm just saying what is obvious. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It just depresses me a little bit sometimes how people fall for these stories that I'm going to bring it back to the Free Speech Union again, because they were instrumental in paying for Posy Parker to go to New Zealand in the first place. But what annoys me is, instead of talking about those things, what we just mentioned, they focus on these stories. People will obsess about stories of nurses who got they say, I got fired because I was gender critical. And that's never the story. The story is always, you went to mediation, you went to see your manager, you tried to sort it out, and you doubled down and you said, no, I will not call this person a woman or whatever. And you made it your whole personality. Instead of just saying, for the sake of my job, and because I go to work and I'm going to meet people all the time that I'm not going to get on with, and I don't necessarily want to speak to them outside of work. But because we've got a job to do, we have to get on with people. And if you're going to work and you're bringing that personality with you, where you literally can't address somebody in a polite way because you've got a problem, that is that's their problem. It's not anybody else's. Do you know what I mean? But constantly.
Yeah, that's why I say, like, even if you want to have this reductive view of the world, politeness is something I have learned is a British value.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and they outsell it. Even some Canadians still distill it and call themselves like excessively polite. If you compare them with the lower type of American that is from North America, because for me America is everything, including I am American too, because I was born in Colombia, right? But let's put definitions aside of what is America and what isn't America. The politeness of the like what is polite, what is polite is when you understand that truths are beyond what you want it to be, and how you believe that you can control a narrative, because Hitler trying to define Germanhood through blood, that he trying to define what makes you a German. And the interesting thing is that the state is defined by who owns a land, a territory, a place, a factory, a medium of production, right? And you will see how this classificatory need of understanding who is and who isn't based on a particular, and in this case we go into race dynamics because Posey Parker is excessively racist, right? Then you understand that what they're trying to do is to create the conditionings for this type of defining who is deserving of what state, even if that state is owned by the person. That's why they call it real state, because there is a difference between how you call a nation, a state, and how the value of women is associated with their ability to give children from 20 to 40 years old, which is the period that they have to have children.
Yeah.
Because after that window of time, they are disposable. The very same way young men are disposable in war, women are disposable after their 40s.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's the sad reality of states.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think, wouldn't you? Like, I'm just watching, I'm just like looking at clips of the Artemis space mission, and I'm thinking about, I hope this does bring people together a bit more and makes them realize, like, you could have a cynical view and go, what's the point in going to the moon? It costs billions of dollars and you're just wasting loads of fuel and all these arguments. But if I think there's something intrinsic about human beings where we understand that the greatest threat upon us is gravity. Like we're always in some kind of pain because of gravity, and that is the thing we want to escape all the time. That's why people take painkillers and get addicted to drugs. It's because they want to get rid of this sense of gravity upon them. And I think that's a mental thing as well. We feel this pressure. We feel like everything is coming at us all the time, and we want to break free of that pressure. And when we see a rocket going up into space like that, it is literally defying the Earth's gravity. And I think this might sound a bit woo-woo and a bit, fanciful, but I think that's what we feel when we get up in the morning. We feel the weight of our bones and our body and our flesh, and that is the thing we wish we could escape. And when people talk about what it means, when people say people are born in the wrong body, meaning trans, or who is born in the right body? Do you know who has a body that goes, right, I've got the perfect body?
Everyone is born in the right body. Everybody is born in the right body. Some people want to just look a little bit different, and that's
I would argue. I'm arguing there is no right body, because I know people that have severe disabilities, and it's like they would love to have the right body, but it's only in the last 100 years that we've been able to have medical science and medical advancements that allows us to not just cure things, but change our bodies in a way that is advantageous to us. And I think that's what we're seeing now. I think I could go off on a massive tangent about this, but I won't, because I like talking about transhumanism, and I think people totally misunderstand.
Yeah, but this guy Clavicular, I've been a little bit just paying attention to this guy because it's interesting. The guy that hammers himself in the face.
Oh God!
Shapes his face to
What's he called?
Facing. Yeah, and he also used methamphetamine, which is literally kind of like eating him from the inside, right? Like, it's just not a very healthy life choice that he's making. But you look, some humans are that simple. They only want something that looks cute, right? In whichever standard of beauty we follow, which is
in terms of aesthetics.
Yeah. And either if it's a man or it's a woman, it's the aesthetics of, and it's, what is aesthetics? And if you get to define aesthetics, you will have to go as back as how Greeks define aesthetics, and also how Romans have been defining aesthetics. If you want to be a more Orientalist, then they will have more nuance and bigger definitions of what aesthetics mean. Because the problem we have now, and it's not West-East, is the fact that aesthetics are essentially what, like, it's the spice of gender. How you express it, the colors, the fabrics, the shades, the sparkles, the particular rose that you give in a particular time of the year. What is the meaning of this rose? What is the song you sing about this rose in a cold night in Moscow? You know what I mean? Like, there is so much, even the music itself. Most music is about love, and most love is always this type of love that everyone craves. You know, it's the type of love that people will say, define it.
I was going to say, do you think there's sort of been a revival in the sense of spirituality and religion? But I don't know if it's spiritual, because I've seen this kind of more, you know, especially on the right, they seem to be clinging again to evangelical and Christian, and I don't know how real that is, or if they believe that that is giving them some righteousness and power to justify their views. Because, like, I like, just to refer back to the media again, there's like one of the main right-wing news outlets, GBnews, which I have been on, and it's the one all the TERFs go on, is run by Paul Marshall, and he calls himself a Christian now, and I'm thinking, well, is that something you've noticed? Like, are people becoming more religious because the world is becoming more kind of confusing?
I think uncertainty makes people religious. That's not new, and I have witnessed that in various angles. Even in the Soviet Union, religion was forbidden. Okay, so yeah, and I had but for instance, when I was growing up in Colombia in the 80s and 90s, evangelical Christians starting to come from the US. So that's kind of like mostly an US export. They've been exporting it since the 70s, 80s, kind of like during that time. And it's, but to be honest with you, like, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way of giving hope to people. But at the same time, it's a very dishonest way of taking a lot of money from them, because unfortunately, that is the big problem. And if people are like, hey, I don't want to pay taxes, but they're giving $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to these so-called, how do you call them, prophets or apostles or whatever.
You see, I follow some right-wing parties on social media, and I follow them because I'm interested in how they speak. And a lot of it, they have this yearning for sort of a nostalgia, sort of a pastoral, you know, what England used to be. And they'll show pictures of like old English villages. And the narrative really is, oh, well, life was simple then, and there was less immigration and there was less crime. But it's like this fiction. It's almost, they've invented a fantasy they want to live in, that they would have to recreate it from scratch. Like some of the, I can sympathise and say, yeah, it would be nice if the world was simpler and everything was quaint, and, you know, everybody knew the neighbour and there was no crime and all this. But we're never going to live in that world unless you build it for yourself. You know, that's my argument with them. And it's like there is a sense that there's always a purity test. And it's like, on one hand, they want to stop immigration and they'll talk about remigration and things like that. But when it comes down to it, the thing they fear is the idea of the other, because they wouldn't want me in their village either, no matter how English I would be. Do you know what I mean? They wouldn't want me there. So, you know.
I think that the concept of othering is something that the British world, and by the British world I mean everything there, and I'm including Ireland too, and including Britannia in France as well. So that's how expansive I am. They have to honestly have this conversation between themselves and define what is an ethnicity, how they define themselves, what language is actually the language they speak. Is what language actually means for them the things they mean, right? Because in most of the world, we use English as a way of like a lingua franca, but it's not a language in which we feel things. I don't feel things in English, if I'm very honest with you. My feelings are mainly in Russian and Spanish. You know what I mean? You can come here with like a Hitler speech or someone speaking with this type of words that seduce people, right? Like, because it's always the charismatic leader that seduces the masses. And I won't feel anything. But if it's in a language I relate to, I may feel things, you know, and I will be able to tell you, hey, this type of rhetorics, which is like I will say the philosopher's stone of the fascists, right? It's like, all the things people want to hear, and you can say them in such passionate way that people will just listen and agree with everything you say. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's essentially what that philosopher's stone they talk about, you know? I think in a nutshell, the one thing I want to say is that I would not have done this, but I've done it anyway. And I think given the conditions and how provocative and how aggressive was this woman, I will still react in a similar way, right? Because I understand their game is bigger than what people can perceive, because I also understand how CPAC is moving and all the influences that they are pulling from like organizations such as the Commission on the Status of Women and other organizations at like human rights spaces, because this battle that Posey Parker has been carrying on, it's very tainted with all of these shadows that emerge from like spaces where you claim to protect women, but in fact you are actually oppressing them and enslaving them sometimes, or trafficking them, which is worse, you know. And we've been learning that. Yeah,
I think the important thing for me, with you was I when it happened, I think I got in touch with you pretty quickly because I knew what was going to happen. I knew the media circus was going to come. And do you remember we did a talk? You came on when I was working with Vicky on the Gender Nebulous podcast. You came on it then, and it was very fresh in your mind. And I remember you talking about why you felt like you needed to fight fascism and things like this. And I think that's still see if you think about it, 3 years on, they don't make a lot of they don't really want to achieve anything because it's a means to its end. They want to be they want to grift in the media, and they want to be able to keep going. So because obviously if they go too far, if they do start to inspire far right and attract far right people, that's not going to work for them. Do you know what I mean? That's gonna be.
I think they just grieved, you know. So they want. Posey Parker wants more diamonds because I know she loves diamonds. Like that's all she talks about with her friends.
She talks about winning. She talks about winning a lot.
Winning, yeah, they can win. You know what? Between Posey Parker and I, she won, and then she always wins, and she won, and that's it. You know, that's what she wants to hear, and that's it. So I'm saying it right now. She won, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck about like whatever she thinks of me, you know.
See, because I'm naturally empathetic, I like to get into the head of other people. So when I think what is in it for her? Like, what is the long-term thing? Because how is this gonna, like, and especially the people around her, I think, how is this going to affect them in the future? Because history has a habit of writing itself, you know, and when real journalists and real historians look at what you did, you are the single figure. You were the David to their Goliath, you know what I mean, to put it simply. And I think people know that. You know, that you can say, oh, you know, I had trouble with my mental health, and that is fine. But I think impulsively you were doing something that was deep, you know, it came from somewhere deep inside you because of your past, because of your history and your family history. And it wasn't just you that recognised that. That's why there were so many people in the park, Because I think it was estimated.
Yeah, Posey Parker was an anti-Semite. All the awful things she was saying back then, like I remember 2022, 2023, like the end of 2022 and early 2023, Posey Parker was obsessed in trying to speak in code about Jewish people, right? They did all the sick Heil and all of that, like the typical things. But yeah, I realized that there was something different this time because there was a pogromic behavior, right? It was very pogromic, like very gregarious. I like to define this behavior like the gregarious nature of like okay, you see, she's triggering everything, especially all these groups that emerge after the pandemic, like the subgroups.
Yeah,
and people were like, and all these kind of emerge in various ways.
But she tried to deny that these neo-Nazi groups had anything to do with her. But the thing is, they were all aware of her, and they were all aware of the fact that she was going to be there, which is why they had a sign that says "Destroy pedo freaks." That's directly that's a gender.
Very interestingly, they forget also that all of those like telegrams, Telegram is a Russian application, right? And various of these apps, they forget. They themselves, they try to be so fringe and they want to be so like, oh my God, we are outside of the narratives of everyone, right? But they are the ones that are being framed in their own narrative, in which they are the ones that are looking like not very intelligent people, right?
Yeah.
And I feel sorry for them because I know that many of these, especially men, they are actually genuinely, they are not like these demonic beings that some people think they are.
Yeah.
In this kind of gender wars dynamics,
Yeah, I'm still just waiting for these gardeners to go. I'm really sorry. It's just so typical that I've waited months to be able to do this with you, and on the one day I decide to do it, it's the one day it's sunny in England for the you know what I mean?
I have a question. Is that the Women's Day around these days?
This what?
Because I think there is Women's Day. Or is it the same as International Women's Day, like March?
No. That was last month. That was last. I can't remember what day it was now. No. I think they've
1 month ago.
Anyway, I think they've gone now. So I'm just going to start this bit again because I wanted to talk about the Melbourne and what was I saying? I've lost my train of thought now. So by the time Posey Parker came to New Zealand and she came to Albert Park, it was already known that these far right, what we call neo-Nazis, were fully aware of her and turned up at one of her events. And you were saying, it was to do, because they are networked. They're not isolated groups. They know who Kellie Jay Keen is, Posey Parker, and they turn up with a sign that says "Destroy pedo freaks," which is straight out of their playbook. And I'm not sure, did you know the people around Kellie, like the women that were her group that she was meeting?
No, I don't know them.
Did you know anything about them? No. Because
I mean, I don't even need to know anything about them because I know, like, I can imagine how they are. No, I think the only person that really like interested me in like learning more about it was Kellie Jay Keen in Shul, and that's it. Because I understand that like she was receiving significant amount of money by several Christian groups.
I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to stop again because I can't believe this. I'm so annoyed because it's the one day the gardeners have not been here since last year, and it's like all I can hear in the background is the bloody lawnmower. Right. I have got quite a lot of us speaking though, so don't worry.
But I think it's always been like that. It's nothing new. This playbook has like 900 years old, as far as I remember. And it's always in a similar manner. But the good thing is that humanity has has grown more beyond the nuance and the shades and colors and the contrasting that exists between forms of truth, not your truth, but also other truths. It's what is helping us to evolve as collectively.
I just find it.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting how they tried to cover everything up and try to say, because the last thing they wanted, the mainstream media, the Daily Mail article is quite detailed, and it does explain the relationship between Kellie Jay Keen and the far right. But we found that the people around those groups, and because it mainly happens on social media, doesn't it? And they just didn't want to talk about it. Whereas I think now, when you look back, they're more open about their Islamophobia. It is Islam that they're against, and I think there's a reason. There's a reason why Islamophobia and transphobia are promoted by the same people, and it's because there's this idea that they can test free speech on the trans issue. They can say, well, we can say you're a man because transphobia is not a real thing, and we're not transphobic. We're just saying what reality is, and then they can say, well, we can say Islamophobia is not a thing because it's not a religion, but they don't understand these are cultures of people. It's not. It doesn't have to be a religion. It doesn't have to be an attack on a race. It just has to attack the culture and the experience of people. And I think that's where there's two, because you know the story about 72 virgins when they were talking about the suicide bombers. That became 72 genders, and it was kind of recycled for yeah, exactly.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There's lots of similarities. I have looked at that, and because it's a kind of way into racism, and it's a way into misogyny, which the dog whistle doesn't necessarily get heard, because it can be talked about in terms of you can talk about immigration, and then you can talk about these things about single-sex spaces, but they're all invasion narratives, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? It's all about invasion of something, or people's lives, or taking over the way of life, or changing what is supposed to be the normal, I suppose.
Humans have always migrated, and in fact, British sailors were quite good at that because they move around the world, and that's why they had a large empire, which they couldn't hold for long, but they still hold for a long time, and that human ability is actually a reason why we have evolved, but at the same time, we have caused some issues in places that where a population comes and whatever. And I don't want to define things deeper than that, because racism is a human problem. It's manifested everywhere. It's a human problem, and they take advantage of this problem to use an aspect of human nature to essentially cause chaos. And that through that chaos, we see the wars that are happening and the justification of wars.
That's right. I mean, I'm sort of looking back on your Instagram now, because I wanted to just look. There's some really beautiful pictures of you, just out and about in different places. And I think that is, you've got to remember that in the great scheme of things, what happened with Posey Parker is just nothing. It's just a blip, and it become this big media thing because it was so effective. It was. I mean, I personally loved it when I saw it happen. I don't want to see people get hurt, and I don't like seeing people rioting. No. But I think for me, and on a selfish level, I was like, "You go, girl." But I know that. But I'm just looking at your Instagram now, and I'm thinking, you've come a long way personally, and you've been through a lot. And I just wanted to say, because I just want to say thanks for talking to me today. I'm sort of gonna wrap it up now, because I've got so much to edit now. But thanks for doing it, because I think people need to know your story. I think you need to write it down and write about your story of coming to New Zealand and your background and your Jewish heritage and all that. I think it's fascinating.
It will happen at some point. I think I am because I'm very young, right? Like I'm only in my 30s,
Right.
but I have a very like complex history
Yeah.
that regardless of what was going on down in my parts or gender issues, my life story is immediately connected with the history of the Soviet Union and also of Colombia, right? So it's
Yeah.
very bigger. It's bigger than I can. But I think I'm writing some chapters. If you go into my Instagram, I don't have this intention of writing a book and profit from it. You know, like I don't have this need for accumulation that most people have because I am not that type of person.
Well,
I'm a scientist, pharmacist, chemist. You know, my mom is
well,
a pediatrician, so I don't need to know more things.
well,
You know,
I'll
I
be.
know enough.
I mean, I've written about you. I've written about you in my blog, and I've tried to, talk about this story of, somebody that had quite extreme experiences, and I think you have, and I think it's not that you say you don't want to write about it, but I think it helps other people to know that they have their experiences are valid too. Do you know what I mean? So that is always, because I've got lots of autobiographies. I read a lot of biographies, and I feel like I like people's personal stories. I think that's probably the journalism in me, because I like a good story. I love a good yarn. I love a good yarn.
Do you
Anyway,
know what happens when you grow up in a polycultural background?
yeah,
You don't get to learn how to read properly. Like I know how to read Russian, but I don't know
right,
how to read Dostoevsky in Russian. I have to
right,
read Dostoevsky in Spanish. You know what I
right.
mean?
I see.
In that on itself kind of like damages the message that Dostoevsky wanted to pass through. You know what I mean?
Well,
Or so, like chemistry, most of the chemistry I learned, it was in English language because I learned pharmaceutical chemistry, right? So yes, language has a very important aspect on how one understands themselves. And if you speak only English, of course, that how you define a single word in that language will define sometimes your entire universe, right?
well, I wanted to ask you, fine, just as a last thing, just like how you feel now about, like where you are now. Do you feel more settled about everything, or does it still feel? Is it a negative thing to talk about, like?
No, it's a neutral thing to talk about. It's neutral. It's just part of. It happened some time ago. Like for my family, it's the most insignificant thing that has ever happened to me. It's not relevant, right?
Yeah,
For my friends in this country, it's a significant thing that happened, right? For me personally, it's something that I feel regret in a way of like that's not really me, but that's how like the media and the news know me about. But I say, you know what? I prefer to be hated for tomato juice and not for supporting genocides or
exactly.
war or things like that. You know, like
Yeah,
in the big scheme of things, the tomato juice person or tomato boy or soup boy or whatever, it's kind of better. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel this. I feel that. I feel like everybody wanted you to be the demon, and it's like you're the least threatening person. Like you're not. It's like they love to flip everything, don't they, to make invert everything.
Yeah.
And oh wow.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's my biggest crime in my life. My biggest crime was pouring tomato juice
yeah.
on Pussy Parker.
Well,
Yeah, that's my biggest crime.
there's going to be a lot more throwing of things at protests. Don't worry about that. That's always going to happen. And I think there's a healthy tradition of people throwing milkshakes and juice and whatever at politicians and people who need to be. I think they need to be ridiculed. Some people just need to be shown to be the clown that they are. Even
When I propose in Spain, there is the Tomatina. It's a festival which many British people love to join. And in
I've
that
heard about this.
Tomatina,
Yeah.
you kind of, that's what humans need. The humans need to have this type of moments where they are allowed to be children again and to kind of like express things they cannot in the world of respectability.
That's good. I've seen that. It's amazing. Yeah. I think the the whole history of protest and the whole history of like those kind of moments. It's always that one photo shot, isn't it? It's always that, like there could be lots of riots. There could be like with Stonewall. But there's always that one photo that is going to make the history books. And I think it's going to be you throwing that juice, and that's going to be the cover of a story about the fight against transphobia. I think that's Anyway.